So back to indigenous customs, or savage customs. Techniques. So here are the techniques of ayahuasca. Icaro, as you probably know, are songs which contain the essence and the power of a particular plant. And the way you get an Icaro is you spend a long time on your own in the jungle listening. And you might dream it, or you might suddenly have a desire to sing, or you might hear it on the wind. Various different ways that these Icaros come. Now, what are the techniques of science? Techniques of science are analysis. And when I say techniques, I should probably say technique, because there is one technique, it is analysis. What type of analysis are we talking about? Right, we've got chemical analysis. So we look at ayahuasca and we say, okay, it's got DMT in it, it's got harmaline in it, it's got beta-carbolines in it, and we know how it works because these two things go together and that's how it works, isn't it? No, actually, that's part of how it works, but harmaline is psychoactive on its own. Ayahuasca is psychoactive on its own, that's why it's called ayahuasca. The brew is called ayahuasca. There's plenty of tribes which use ayahuasca without the admixture of plants, of chacruna, but we don't really hear about them because the first people who really wrote about it, which was the McKenna brothers, worked about how it worked. They said, this is how it works. Ayahuasca is, and they defined it. Remember we were talking about defining ayahuasca. They said ayahuasca is monoamine oxidase inhibitor and DMT. So just to make it clear what I'm talking about, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, according to the theory, well, it does actually happen. They inhibit the enzymes which would otherwise break down DMT, which you ate. So they let that DMT get into your brain, right? Does that make sense? Yes? Good, all right. Groovy. So, chemical analysis, you break something down. Ayahuasca and chacruna have hundreds, thousands of chemicals in them, but we look at the ones that we understand. So we don't really get the whole complexity. This is me in Cardiff University, I'm having a perm actually. I'm not. I'm having psilocybin, and I was looking at pictures of chaos and saying whether I could see an object, an animate object or an inanimate object, and clicking a mouse according to which I could do, whilst the doctors looked at my connector hubs in my brains. Very, very cool and very interesting research. So, brainwave analysis. Now, if I had one of these machines, I would be investigating all kinds of interesting things. I'd be putting people in there and asking them to sing carols. My tradition is Santa Diamete, so what we do is a lot of singing, a lot of praying. I would put a Dianista in there and see what happens to his brain on ayahuasca when he prays. But no one's done that, absolutely no one. I know one guy at Imperial who was smudging the place. He was burning sage before he put people into the EEG machine, before he put the thing on them. But he did that without knowledge of any of his co-workers. He did it early in the morning before they had arrived. He really didn't want them to find out that he was messing around with sage, because you don't do that kind of thing in Imperial. Dieta, sexual Dieta Icaros. Wouldn't it be interesting to grab one of these shamans as he came back from his 6 months or year alone, or her, of course, and stick him or her in one of these machines? But it hasn't been done. What else have we got? Mathematical analysis. This is really interesting. How do we know if something's true? We know it's true if it's very unlikely that it happened by mistake. This is like p equals 0.05. So if you run the experiment a whole load of times, it would only happen once in lots and lots and lots and lots of times. And then we say it's scientifically or statistically significant. Significant, we're talking about significance. And in science there is only that significance. Can't talk about any other type of meaning, because meaning is kind of magical thinking. Thinking that the world is talking to you, thinking plants are talking to you. So you have mathematical significance. Now, how does this come up? How does that taboo against other forms of meaning or meaning generation come up? This came up with a list. I'm part of an ayahuasca academia list, and someone sent a question in to us, which was, can ayahuasca cure cancer? This is someone who was obviously dying of cancer. And the answer from the assembled academics was, there is no data about whether ayahuasca can cure cancer. Which is true, there is no scientific data about whether ayahuasca can cure cancer. It's very, 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 very difficult from within a scientific paradigm to say that, because you need a control, and you need to have a whole bunch of people who are dying of cancer and feed half of them something which tasted just like ayahuasca, and then it would be very, very difficult and unethical, okay? So that's a limitation of science. That doesn't mean to say that science is awful, but it does mean to say that scientists should really take a step back when questions are asked of what ayahuasca can do. If you ask me if ayahuasca can cure cancer, I'll say, well, tell you what, why don't you phone up 2 of my friends who were given terminal diagnoses for cancer and who are still alive decades later? Why don't you go and ask the people who know, who've been working with it for the last few hundred years, or maybe thousands of years? So that's a taboo which is interrupting our understanding, the growth of knowledge. Psychoanalysis, another analysis. So psychoanalysis is interesting. We tend to use these terms, although Maria, I'm sure she uses much more interesting terms in her analysis. So dissociation, primary narcissism, hallucination, OCD, as I said, hallucination contains the term hallucination. It is the term hallucination, which means seeing something which doesn't exist. Now, ayahuasca was used for curing, obviously. It was also used for divination, and divination is seeing something which does exist, but you don't know where it is, or you shouldn't know about it. Has divination been investigated in the scientific laboratories and in journals? Not very much. Not very much. Right, as a dimister, we've got a bunch of different words for these kind of things. For example, we would call dissociation. That means a part of your brain talks to another part of your brain. We call that spirit contact, and they might tell you stuff, and you can go. They might tell you, those keys you lost. They're on top of your or wherever they are. Primary narcissism, we call that bliss or força, dissolving into the infinite. Hallucination, we would call that a vision. And OCD, encostar means to kind of lean on somebody, to lean towards. Encosto is a spirit that comes close to you and makes you want to do something. It says, go on, do it. You want to, you don't want to. Won't let you think about anything else. That's called in literature, in the what do you call it, psychopharmacological literature, forced thinking. I call that an obsessive spirit. Does any of this come into the lab? No. The comparison's done between if it's more helpful to talk about something in terms of a spirit or dissociation. No, not in ayahuasca studies. There's some interesting stuff going on in other places, which we'll come back to. What have we got? Where do you get your knowledge from? Right, dream, inspiration, nature. This is a guy hugging a tree. There's a really interesting case the spirits, the nature spirits, they talk to shamans. That's what shamans say. They tell you how to use them, they tell you when to use them. They might tell you all kinds of strange stuff. Now, there was a really interesting case. I'm going to go back for a second. No, you don't do that. Okay. Yeah, there's a really interesting case with a Sami academic, actually, from Norway. That's the indigenous shamanic tradition there. He wanted to make a citation in an academic paper, and the citation was Pers com tree, because he'd been told something by a tree. And this raised quite a big problem, because, well, there are two problems actually. One of the problems is it's a very difficult thing to do in the academy, say this is a journal and Pers com tree. The other problem is it was Norway, and Norway is pretty cool. And they're really being quite careful about not pushing out, being open to indigenous knowledge. So they had to find a way around this problem. And what did they do? They said that the tree had not filled out a consent form. So it could not be referenced in scientific academic paper. Right, so where does science get its authority from? If it's not getting its authority from, for example, empirical studies, like we've seen with that SSRI thing, the anti-depressants, where is it getting from? Is it getting it from, 500 years of colonial history? Let's have a look at the history of pharmacology. Or is it getting it from all the cool things that it has invented? Is it science that invents fantastic things and we take the advantage of that? Let's have a look at these. Right, so penicillin, Viagra, nitrous oxide, LSD, these are all very useful and interesting chemicals and bits and bobs. Does anyone know what these have in common?
Invented by accident.
Invented by accident, very good. You've seen this before. They were all discovered by mistake, as was MAO inhibition. Now, you're going to see how science works. It's very interesting, as my dad says. to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When we clocked monoamine oxidase inhibition, we were very proud, when I say we, gentlemen scientists, I guess, we're very proud of ourselves. We go, oh, we worked out how it works. Or the indigenous people have known for hundreds of years and been using it for 100 years. They've been making ayahuasca, monoamine oxidase inhibition, and every single class of psychiatric drug. They've all been discovered by mistake. Who told me that was Professor David Nutt. So where does science get its authority from? Where does science get its inventions from? That's interesting, isn't it? Is it all the cool stuff that we get from science? Let's have a look at Tesla. Tesla was walking along in Budapest, in Central Park, with his friend reciting poetry. And he was frozen to the spot by a vision of the AC motor in front of him with all the clarity of concrete. And he went and patented it, and this is what runs our electric grid. Tesla took, I think, about 500 patents. The Tesla coil, which makes telecommunications possible, your radio, your TV, not your TV actually, the old TVs, and the AND gate, robots, wireless transmission. Anyway, so wireless transmission, see, that's Tesla, spirit of Tesla. Right, so Tesla never made a calculation. He never made a blueprint. He used to lie down on his couch and close his eyes and do what we would probably call shamanic visioning or something like that these days. He would take journeys on across fantastic landscapes and see strange cities and see these inventions, and then he'd bring them back and he'd patent them, offer them to the world. Died in poverty. Spontaneous insight. Melvin Calvin was waiting in the car park for his wife, and in the space of 30 seconds he clicked the Calvin cycle, which is the series of chemical substrates which it's a cycle which captures light for photosynthesis. It's the way that sugars are made out of photosynthesis. And he said he had no idea how that came to him at that point. Contemplating mysticism, Boole. When he was a teenager, he was given a mission by God, according to him, to formalize in algebra the way people thought. And then one day he was contemplating mysticism, and he clicked it, and it was Boolean algebra, and that is what runs Google searches today. Dozing. Ramanjan, a very, very interesting man. He was a mathematician, completely uneducated, brilliant mathematician. He used to get his formulas from his family goddess in the morning. His formulas look like this. That's one of them. So this would come to him first thing in the morning, and he said, an equation for me has no meaning unless it represents a thought of God, which is extremely beautiful, I think. He didn't have enough money to buy paper, so he used to write down on bits of paper his theorems, but not his proofs. So they're still trying to work back from his theorems to try and get his proofs. His theorems are being used in string theory and opening up new branches of chaos maths. Died a young man, died in his 30s. Lowy, he was the guy who worked out that neurons or nerve transmission work through chemical means. So he was talking about this to his friend one day, but he couldn't think of an experiment to test if there was how the chemicals worked, and so he forgot about it until many years later. I can't remember exactly many. Well, it was like 14 or 18 years later. He woke up one morning and there was a scrawl on a bit of paper next to his bed, and he couldn't decipher it. And the following day he went to sleep again for a night, and he woke up with this idea of an experiment of how to test the neuronal chemical transmission. And he said, if I'd been thinking straight, if I'd been thinking normally, I wouldn't have done it. He got up, he went straight to his lab, he did the test, and he proved his theory. Hypnagogic trance, Kekula, this guy's really interesting. He was on the night bus home and fell into a reverie, he says, and he started to see the atoms dancing around in front of him and making couplets and coming apart. And you know those models of like carbon chains with like balls and sticks and balls? That's called the structural theory. That came to this chap as he was dozing on the bus. And another time he was working on his textbook and he turned towards the fire and he dozed off to sleep, and the atoms started dancing in front of him again. And then he saw the Ouroboros, the snake, symbol of knowledge, grabbing its tail, biting its tail mockingly in front of him. And he clicked that was how the benzene ring worked. Because the benzene ring, the atoms don't really add up, the weights don't add up if it's a straight line, and no one can work out there is actually a circle. Mozart, yeah, we're talking about him. Waking, Einstein went to bed one day, depressed. He said to his friend, I will never be able to solve this special relativity. And so he went to bed, jumped out of bed the next day with the answer, started writing, wrote for a couple of weeks, and then took to his bed ill again. And finally, illness. This is quite interesting when we're talking about shamanism, because shamanism often comes to people beginning with an illness. They'll get very, very sick, and then they'll get better, and they'll also have the ability to cure other people. So Nietzsche, no, we're talking about him. Wallace, that's an interesting guy. William Alfred Wallace. He was in the Malay Peninsula. He was an explorer and used to collect specimens in the 1850s and send them back to his friend Darwin. And Darwin was expecting some kind of butterfly when he got a package one day, and he got a whole bunch of paper, and all this paper said, it talked about natural selection. It said the means of natural selection and the implications of natural selection for the evolution of species. Now, Darwin had been working on this for literally decades. And he didn't want to release this knowledge. He thought it would be very shocking to contemporary taboos, actually. So this was 1857, he got his package, but he published pretty sharpish after that. He published in 1858. It's almost as if something is trying to get itself known. Who knows? And finally, catalysts, by which I mean psychedelics. So Mark Pesky, for example, he was taking psilocybin, and then wham, he uses the word wham. It came to me just like that. The protocols for virtual reality. Carrie Mullis, famously on acid, he was flying along on the the DNA chain, and worked out the RNA polymerase reaction. He was given the Nobel Prize for this, and some other people. So, perspectives on shamanism. So when the Jesuits looked at shamanism, they saw sorcery, they saw bewitchment, they saw conversing with the devil. When a shaman does his shamanizing, he's doing magic, he's doing healing, and he's doing divination. And when a scientist looks at it, they think, healing is fine, you can look at healing, that's what doctors are meant to do, but as soon as you start talking about divination, really that's not cool in the journals. One guy who did do that was Jeremy Narby. He took four molecular biologists into the jungle to do works with shamans, and all of them made breakthroughs in their work. They were all having they all had blockages in their work, they couldn't work out stuff. And they all made breakthroughs, and a number of them also met spirit plant teachers. So finding out something you don't already know. Now, I've got an extremely good story about that, but I'm not going to tell it now. I'm going to give you a break, and you can go and get some cake, and you can come back and ask me some questions in a minute. Not quite finished, actually. David Luke, who was here a couple of weeks ago, he's done some quite interesting stuff on precognition, all on himself, taking dose after dose after dose of, was it San Pedro? I think it was San Pedro. Yeah, mescaline. Yeah, and I'll tell you about his experiment. It was really interesting. He got a friend to prepare selections of 4 clips from videos. Oh, that was ayahuasca, actually. No, it wasn't ayahuasca. Yeah, San Pedro. He doesn't like ayahuasca. Can't handle it. Anyway, so he got these four videos, and so what he would do was he would take his medicine and then do a visualization. And he said the first time he did the visualization, he saw was skeletons running around a dead planet, and then he watched 4 clips which his friend had prepared for him, and one of those clips was the correct clip, and he had to choose it from all the others. And one of those clips was the scene from Star Wars where the stormtroopers are running around Death Star, and he said, yes, that's the one, and it was the one, and he got a positive correlation, and this kind of stuff. So this is going on in some places. There are people who break these taboos. I'm not sure if it's very good for his career, but that's what he's doing. So, finally, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Francis Bacon. Science is but an image of the truth. And this is my book. It's called Science Revealed. I was the Reverend Nemu. Thank you very much.
So I think we're going to have a break for 10-15 minutes, go downstairs, get a drink, Kate, come back, and Danny's going to talk again. Yeah, for about...
Yeah, what I'll do is you can ask me some questions. If you ask me these two questions, if you want to, you can say, Danny, what's that story about divination? That sounds interesting. Or, Danny, what's that story about the cure where you overcame a disease which was meant to be disfiguring or possibly fatal with ayahuasca?
We're going to talk about that. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So let's hear about Danny's cured disease after the break.